As always, it's a pleasure that the Kehillah helps me prepare for Yontiv. And as Silverstein said, it's a special schus before Shavuos to come to Paltrin Shomelech, to a Heichal HaTorah that's osik in the Torah day and night. Really, it's always beautiful to see more and more happening and coming here. Okay, Shavuos is challenging because it's very hard without practical mitzvahs. Meaning, the mitzvahs essay of Shavuos we don't have without the Beis HaMikdash. We don't have the Shtei Alechem. We don't have the korbanos a person would bring, Shalmei Chagiga, Alas Re'iyah. We don't have any of those. On other Yom Tovim, we have, on the Shalosh Regalim, we have Sukkah, we have Lulav and Esrog, we have Matzah, we have Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Here, what do we have? The dairy companies would like to convince you that cheese is d'oraisa, right? And they seem to expect the shear much greater than the Chazon Ish for people to be eating, almost 24 hours of dairy. That's not d'oraisa, right? Even staying up at night is not d'oraisa. The mitzvah that we do have is the mitzvah of Simchas Yontiv. That we do have. Now again, obviously the reminder that men are supposed to be Mesameach Ishto, they're supposed to be Mesameach children, but the simcha that a person themselves is supposed to have as well. Not just v'simachta, to be Mesameach Acherim, but v'samachta. So it's especially difficult on Shavuos because in the eyes of the world, the day of something like Matan Torah, Kabbalas HaTorah, would seem to make a person sad. Why? Ramesh Shapir explained that the idea of simcha is when a person is expansive. Is expansive when you're reaching that which is beyond you. He says if you see a little kid trying to get up on the counter and he manages to climb, he'll laugh. He's happy he's got to someplace. And he says you particularly see this in Chazal when they speak about shurim. Right? You have a tefach sochek. A laughing tefach is one where the fingers aren't tight together. So it's a bit bigger than the actual tefach. Right? Or an ephah, which is a measure, let's say, for flour. So a happy ephah would be one that's what we would call a heaping teaspoon, that holds more than just what's in there. Something which is sad is constricted. In the eyes of the world, something like the Torah constricts a person, limits a person, takes away the vitality of a person, takes away a person's ability to express themselves in their kochos. That perhaps is what we see with the Chazal telling us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu offered each nation the Torah, right? People know the Yom Tov Erlich song that Rabbi Ram Fried did in Hebrew, right? In each nation, you can keep adding on nations now as they come. What's in there? It says, don't steal. No, we're all about stealing. What it means is they didn't want to give up something. It wasn't just a hobby. They felt that this was something that was their kochos. This was their power. Maim genuvim yimtoku. Rav Dessler explains that the idea, what does it mean that stolen waters taste sweet? Right? If you examine the H2O in the laboratory, there's no more sugar in stolen water than in the other. But it's the person's sense of fulfillment that he was so clever that he overcame obstacles and he knew how to steal and to get away with it and all these things. That is what brings the satisfaction of it. And here, Am Yisrael gets the whole package, and we would think that that makes us, so to speak, less. In fact, the nations of the world do admire, so to speak, someone who manages to cut himself off from Olam Hazeh, even to the extent, perhaps, of not feeling desires for things of Olam Hazeh, and that they'll view as holy. I read a book about the history of India at one point, during the time of the British and the transition, and they said that Gandhi, right, claimed to have overcome human urges, right, to the extent that he had nothing of what we would call the Yetzer Hara, right, not for food, not for other physical things, not for that, and this was something that they looked at. This is obviously very different than what we look at with the Torah. The Torah is Torah's Chaim. The Chayei Olam Nata B'Sochenu. Torah is life itself, and it gives life. It makes us more rather than less. But how? I once heard Rabbi Victor Miller speaking before Shavuos. He was speaking about Megillas Rus, and he spoke about the term used to describe Boaz as an Ish Chayil, an Ish Chayil. As we also see in Mishlei, there's an Eshes Chayil. He says, what does that mean? He says, Chayil means a fighter. Chayil means full of life. A person who's doing, he said in his inimitable way, he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no desire for us to be a frum log, right? Meaning, ashtikol, it's a piece of wood, right? You're frum, but there's no life to you. He says, that's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. The Torah is supposed to be mechaya us. It's supposed to give us life, make us more, rather than less. We find this in Chazal, which tells us that if a person feels he's in the grips of the Yetzer Hara, so he should learn Torah. If that doesn't help, he should say Kriya Shema. If that doesn't help, Yazkir Los Yom HaMisa. Right? You should remember the idea that it doesn't last forever. Right? At some point, the Chevra Kadisha take care of you. So there's a Chidushei Agonim in the Ein Yaakov on the side. They ask the question, now, this seems very dangerous. In other words, you're dealing with the Yetzer Hara. It was extremely dangerous, right? It's waiting, Vakesh La Miso. So why do you fool around? If Yazkir Lo Yom HaMisa is the tried and true, powerful weapon to defeat the Yetzer Hara, why don't you start with that? Why do you start with other things? It's like Lo Aleinu, if some terrorist attacked you, so you try to hit him with your notebook, and then, you try to throw your lunch at him, and then you remember that you have a gun, and you take that out, right? Take out the gun if it's a dangerous terrorist. So they answer that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to be ovid in that way. Yazkir Lo Yom HaMisa is an emergency action which is used, to sap your vitality, to bring down your mood, to somewhat get out of you the idea of this desire for life and all that life offers. But that isn't the way we're supposed to serve Hashem l'chatchila. That's something that a person does if you're really stuck, right? And you can't do anything else. But it's supposed to be from things that are positive, from what we get from learning Torah, from Kriya Shema, from remembering what we are devoting our lives to, and the Ava that's there in Torah, and the Ava in mitzvahs. Rav Hirsch writes about this in a fascinating piece when he talks about the Ben Sora Umorah. And there he talks about the idea of bar mitzvah. And in certain ways he's sympathetic, and we can feel it. If you've ever been in a bar mitzvah where somebody wants to give this speech, and you have this little hat with feet walking around there saying, thank you for coming to my bar mitzvah. And they say, Shimon, you are now a man. According to the Torah, you are now, right, a full ish. You could be chayav misin, based in, like all the rest of us, right? That's it. And it's not just that he's still a pipsqueak, so to speak, but it's also at a time in his life that his entire existence is changing over. He's feeling desires and yitzarim that he hasn't been aware of before. And that's when you hit him with it? He says it seems not fair. He says, in general, the world looks at that time of life as a time of the awakening of Ra, of evil inside the person. A sweet little kid, but now comes the bad. Now comes the desire for bad. Now comes the real acting out bad. Now comes all these things. But, he says, that's not the way it's supposed to be. So, in other words, at that stage, there seems to be only two possibilities. Either surrender, right, and deal with your surroundings as you do, or to somehow give up, meaning surrender to what the Yetzer wants you to do, or to become less alive. To become less alive. To be there and somewhat say, okay, everything's usher, it's usher, I can't do it, and to kind of in your depressed way go along keeping Torah and mitzvahs. He said this is not what's supposed to be. He says this is the time which is supposed to be the gevura shel ish, a person who becomes a man, right? It's a time of gevura. What helps us? Barasi Yetzer Hara, it says in Kiddushin, Hashem says, I created the Yetzer Hara, Barasi lo Torah tavlin. I created the Torah as that tavlin for the Yetzer Hara. Now this is a tricky expression. Many people like to, it's the second part. The Gemara starts with a mashal there that says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the Yetzer Hara. Mashal ma'adov adomer, what's it like to a king that wounded his son? And the son has an open wound. So the king gives him what's called the poultice, right? It's like this bandage that you put on it. He says, put this on the wound. As long as you have this on the wound, You can eat hot things or cold things. You can wash in hot water and cold water. Nothing will happen to you. If you take off this poultice, it will become infected. What's called malenumi. Says, so too, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Yetzer Hara. Ubarasi lo Torah tavlin. And created the Torah as the tavlin for the Yetzer Hara. So some of Farshim say it's like a cure, a medicine for the Yetzer Hara. But the most literal explanation of tavlin is a spice. Okay, that is what we have. So here is a sefer. It's called the Orach Chaim. He was a Talmud of the Maggid of Mezrich, and he brings from the Maggid the following reading of that Gemara in Kiddushin. He says, "V'lo ein hamoshel donel l'nimshal." He said, it doesn't seem to make sense. The Yetzer Hara is, so to speak, the meat, and the Torah is the spices. He says it should be that the Iker is the meat, right? And the Torah should be the Iker, not the Tavlin. So he says something shocking. He says, "Ha'emes hu kain, sha'yetzer hara hi ha'ikar, v'tzorich ha'adam lavud Hashem yisbarach v'yizlavus ha'nimshach mi'yetzer hara." Meaning, the Yetzer Hara, which again, the Sfarim explain, is Yetzer is a creative force, right? It's a creative force which can be the root of evil things which come, or which can be used to the positive, b'chol levavcha, to serve Hashem b'shnei yitzarecha. Okay, a difficult thing to do, but that has its power. Now, what is he talking about when he says this hislavus that comes from the Yetzer Hara? Because this is in Maseches Yoma, that the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah saw that Am Yisrael were having such a hard time with the Yetzer of Avodah Zarah, so they did a spiritual operation on us. They did an Avodah Zarah-ectomy. They removed the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. And it came with a vision, right? It came like a lion of fire coming from Beis Kodesh HaKadosh. Meaning it's an image of power, of Gvura that came out. Rosh Hashiva, Aaron Shechter Zatzal told us, he said, you may get all like triumphant, and yay, the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah disappeared. He said, you have no idea what we lost when we lost that. He said, they used to have a desire, a lust for things of Ruchnius, like our most strong physical desires. We can't relate to that. That's why when reading Tanakh, we can't understand why they keep running to Avodah Zarah. Torah doesn't keep you busy. The whole there, you go and Shoftim, Melachim, everything's good. Ish tachas gavnu, tachas teinos, and then they start worshiping the Baal. And then Hashem sends the Plishtim to attack them. And then, why? Why are you going worshiping the Baal? Why are you worshiping this one and that one, the Asher and the Molech? We don't understand. That's the Gemara where Menashe, right? One of the Chachamim said, tomorrow we're going to talk about Chavrin Menashe, our friend Menashe, in a disparaging way. He was a big Ovid Avodah Zarah. Menashe came to him in a dream. He said, if you had lived when I lived, you would have lifted up, right, the bottom of your bekishes so you could run faster to get to the Avodah Zarah. We don't understand what that was in the negative sense, and we also don't understand in the positive sense. It's interesting. Really, Melech of Lijan said that no spiritual thing totally disappears. He said, it left the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that lion, but it took up hiding in the answer for money. He said that became an Avodah Zarah in an interesting way. Okay, now, the Gemara continues that they wanted to then get rid of the Yetzer Hara of Arayos. If we're looking at what gets us into trouble, that's on the top of the list also, and they did so, but the world came to a standstill. You could not even find a fresh-born egg the next day. Right? You couldn't find a bius bas yoma. The power of desire to create a next generation, disappeared, was gone. So the Maggid explains that again, the word beisa, and this is interesting, in Aramaic, the word for beitza, for an egg, is beya, right? And one of the reasons we have the beitza on the Seder plate at night, when it simply just has to be a tavshil, a cooked item, one of the remazim is boyer achmona l'mifrikei Am Yisrael, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to redeem Am Yisrael. Beya is an idea of asking, of wanting, of davening. So the Maggid says, even bius bas yoma, meaning even on a day where the day itself should help you daven, like Shabbos or Yom Tov, where davening should be easy, beyasa, it couldn't be found. There was no koch. That passion which we need for davening wasn't there, it disappeared. Now, we shouldn't get us wrong. The Yetzer Hara is not our personal trainer. The Yetzer Hara is not our friend. right? I remember of Nebenzahl, I heard from him, Nebenzahl Shlita, he said, people think that the Yetzer Atov wants to give you good and Olam Haba and Ruchnias, but the Yetzer Hara wants you to have a really good life in Olam Hazeh. He wants you to be strong and healthy and happy and enjoying life. He says, absolutely not true. He says the Yetzer Hara wants to kill you physically as well. He says, if you look at a little human baby compared to an animal babies do not do stupid, dangerous things. If there's a fire, they run away. They don't stand close to someplace where they can fall off. Little human babies, toddlers, you have to be watching them all the time. He said, why? Because the human baby has the Yetzer Hara that wants to destroy it physically as well. Once the seichel develops, it can't get you to do those kind of things, so it convinces you to smoke or to drive too fast or other things like that, but it's still there trying to destroy your olam hazeh, not just your olam haba. So it's ra, but it's a koach that with the power of Torah, the tavlin, which can transform it, right? We know that something which is avida l'taima, something which goes into a tarovis, into a mixture, even if it's a little bit, it can't be batal l'shishin just like that because it transforms the entire mixture. Its taste is felt throughout. That's the idea of that tavlin. So the Medrash, the Tanchuma in Bereshis says a fascinating thing. Vayomer Hashem Elokim Heino Adam. So Hashem says, after Adam did the chet, says here, if he'll go, he'll eat from the Eitz Chaim, he'll live forever. This would not be appropriate after the chet. Zeh shomer HaKosuv, right? Re'ezem matzosi ashasor Elokim es Adam yoshor. Says in Koheles, Hashem made a person straight. Lo bro HaKadosh Baruch Hu shenikra tzadik v'yosher. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is himself called tzadik and yosher, righteous and straight. Esa Adam b'tzalmo, he didn't create man in his image, elokadei lios tzadik v'yosher kamo, so that we should also be tzadik and yosher like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'im tomar loma bara yetzer hara. Okay, so if he wanted us to be straight and tzaddikim, why give us a yetzer hara? Shekosuv bo ki yetzer leiv ha'adam ra min urov. The yetzer, the desire inside the person, is ra from the time of his youth, from the time of his neurim. So here the Medrash says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says like this: Ata omer shuhu ra. He says, you say that it's bad. Mi yuchal lasos tov. Who could make it good? Meaning, is it entirely always bad? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ata osos ra. You're the one who makes the yetzer hara ra. Lama. He says, Tinok ben chamesh ben shesh v'sheva shmona teisha enam chotim. He says, little kids that age, he says, they don't do chet. They can misbehave, I guess, but they're not like drawn to chet in that same way. Elim ben eser ve'elach vozu megadel yetzer hara. Once the child's getting samach la'ish, 10, 11, 12, then he himself is being megadel the yetzer hara. Now he says, Tomar einodam yochel lishma atzmo. So you're going to say, okay, Rebbeinu Shalom, it's impossible. You gave us this yetzer hara, it's impossible. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ata asiso sora. You made it bad. Lama tinoka yisa v'lo chatosa. You were a little kid at one point, you didn't do the chet. Nizgadalta v'chatosa. You grew up, you started doing chet. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'kama dvarim koshim yesh b'olam yosem yetzer hara. He says, you know what? There are a lot of things in the world that are harder than the yetzer hara. Umarim mimenu, and more bitter than the yetzer hara. V'atem mamtikin also. But you make them sweet. Right? Ein lechamar minat turmus. The turmus, right, people learned in Shabbos, is this type of bean that you had to cook 7 times in order for it to be sweet. Otherwise, it's very bitter. It's called lupines. Right? I heard this medrash from Ibn Zion Twersky from Milwaukee in the Shir, and he said he actually once accidentally bought lupines to put in his chont, and it was inedible. He said it was incredibly bitter. So he says, what do? Ata shokit l'shalko l'amtiko b'mayim sheva pa'amim. You cook it 7 times, pour out the water each time. Achu nasa mosok v'chein chardal. So too, you know how to work with mustard, tzlaf, right, the caper plant. He says, okay, ma morim shabarosi, things that I created bitter, be'etzem, meaning these things are bitter. That's the way they were made. Mamtikin l'sorchecha. You know how to make them sweet for your needs. Yetzer hara amosu b'yodcha lachas kama v'kama. So the yetzer hara that I gave into your hands, Hu yimshel bo. You're supposed to be able to rule over to it. So certainly you're supposed to be able to make it sweet. Now, it's a strange medrash, this combination between saying that it's ra and the sweet. In the footnotes here, it's called the Anaf Yosef, so he brings, this is very difficult. Haim lo rahu me'atzmo? What does the Kodesh Baruch Hu say? You make the Yetzer Hara ra. Isn't it bad by itself? So he brings from the Alshich, right, that this can only be understood with the famous mashal from the Zohar Kodesh. The Zohar Kodesh says that the mashal for the Yetzer Hara is like a king who has his son, the prince, and he tells his son, listen, you're going to be the next king. You have to marry a proper princess from a royal family. She'll be the queen, etc. So no going around, right, with low-class women, etc. You understand? Yes, Father, I understand. He then, right, has his servants hire a woman of ill repute to go and try to seduce his son. So it asks, what is her tafkid? He's paying her money to do something. On one hand, to do something very bad, to get his son to do an avera. But what's he really paying her to do? What's her true tafkid? That the son should say no, that the son should refuse her. And with that, then she's really fulfilling her task, and the king will reward her even more. Okay, so meaning it's true. The setup is ra, and it's coming to do ra to you. But you can make it good. You can make it sweet. Now, nobody should be arrogant and think, okay, I'll do that right now. I'll walk out. I'm going to make my Yetzer Hara sweet. Right? The Maral in his Drush al Torah says that we do find on Shavuos that we have the Shtei Alechem. The korban of Shavuos is chametz. And even though usually kichol sver v'chol dvash, zakrivu, things which are leavened, things which are chametz, we're not supposed to bring as a korban. In this case, we do. Because, he says, the Torah has the power, right, to rule over and to enable us to utilize this power that's called the Yetzer Hara. He says it's the Yetzer Hara is called, it says even Boro Koro Ra, even the one who created it, Hashem calls it Ra, because all Ra comes out from it. But if a person has that Kesher to Torah in the right way, so then he says he doesn't have to distance it. Now again, he says if there's even the furthest chashash that your interaction with the Yetzer Hara, with that energy and trying to harness it in a positive way, is going to bring you to some chait, stay away. But he says potentially the power of Torah enables a person to harness that energy for the positive, right, in a way that should be able to enable us to live a very different way. So this is our picture of who and how we're supposed to be serving Hashem and supposed to be serving on Shavuos. Hakom modim v'Shavuos b'ina nami lachem. Everybody agrees. It says, right, another Yom Tovim is a question, Chetzio lachem, Chetzio Hashem, right, which is what we bring down, that half a day you spend learning and davening, half a day eating with the family and doing these things. But Hatzeres on Shavuos, Hakol modim de ba'ina nami lachem. Everyone agrees that you cannot fulfill Shavuos just by learning and fasting. You have to have the lachem, because that is part and parcel of the simcha of what we have with the Torah. Rav Moshe said that the idea of simcha is the idea of reaching something beyond. But another aspect of simcha is when you transform, when you flip something over, when you turn something over, when you take something that seems to be, a piece of trash that was thrown at it and you turn it into something beautiful. That's a tremendous simcha which is there. The power of Torah to transform Ra, to transform the physical into spiritual, that is something which is a tremendous source of simcha for Am Yisrael. And therefore, it means that the Torah came to give us more life than other nations have, because they don't know how to transform that power of life, that vitality that's called Yetzer Hara. Either they dehumanize themselves and don't live as full human beings, or they give into it and use it in the wrong way. But the Torah gives us that ability to live and to live fully. Magir of Mezrich said a mashal. He said there was a king who was a very wealthy king, and he had anything a king would want. If he wanted music, He claps his hands, and he had the best musicians in the country would come play what he wants. If he wanted wisdom, he had experts in all fields to come talk to him in every wisdom. If he wanted an artist, whatever he wanted, he had. And one day, someone comes to visit the king, and he's not in his main throne room. And they ask, where's the king? They said, he's in that room over there. He goes in. And the king is sitting in front of a bird cage with a big parrot in there. And the parrot is going, squawk, Pal, you want a cracker? And the king is like laughing and clapping his hands and giving his bird crackers. So the man has, Your Majesty, you have the best musicians in the world. You have the best wise men in the world, the best dancers, the best painters, the best sculptors. Why are you sitting here getting so excited about this parrot? He said, don't you see? It's a parrot and it's talking. That's the simcha. He says, this isn't meant to be. This is something. So too says the Maggid. It's true, we're physical like everybody else. But when we take all of that energy and we channel it, like Rav Hirsch says that we should be doing, into Avodas Hashem b'simcha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has so much simcha with us, so much from us. I want to finish by mentioning that when we talk about Torah, so it's true, right? The more a person learns in Torah, the more these powers come to him. But it's also, the more the Torah is absorbed inside of you, the more you become connected to Torah at whatever level of learning you are. Okay? Meaning, it's not telling us here that the ability to survive our struggles with the Yetzer Hara is the exclusive domain of Avrechim like we have here, right? It can't be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent everyone unarmed. Everyone has a connection to Torah. So it's if it becomes into the person, it becomes part of it. They have Avas Torah, they have Avas Chachamim. The little bits they love are there. I'll just give an example. My grandmother, Aleh Shalom, came to America. She came to Boston at like age 15, I think. She lived in a little town in Russia, and there were some pogroms, and her brother, who was older than her, said, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to America. We have a relative there who can sponsor. He says, you want to come with me? Come. And her parents told her to go. So she came just with this one, 19-year-old brother, 15-year-old girl, came to Boston in those days. And anyone who knows, like, what was happening is those people who came from religious homes were tossing things left and right? And there was tremendous pressure, right, to become socialist or communist or everything which was there. That was the world of the young people. Old people could still remain religious or something. And yet somehow she remained religious. And it was a nice thing they did in school. They told us to go record a grandparent or something, ask them about their life, which was a very good idea because I never would have known any of this. So at one point I asked her, I said, how or why did you stay frum? Because she was telling me that there used to be this diner that was on the way to Shul, right, in the Jewish area of Boston in those days. It was called the G&G Diner. They called it the Greasy Gopal. And there she said all the anarchisten would sit. That was her general name for communist, socialist, Bundes, whatever, the anarchists. And they would make fun of everyone going to Shul. So I said, so how did you stay? So she said it was because of Pesia Dalmona. There was a woman in her town who was called Pesia Dalmona. I said, what did she do? She said she did two big things. She taught me how to read, and she would learn with me the Tzenorena. Right, the Tzenorena is with the Yiddish. It brings midrashim on the parsha, and she said I learned that with her. And also, the Specia Dalmana was a bit more wealthy than other people in town. She had a big house, and there were tzaddikim who would come to visit the town. Right, this was known. There were rebbes and others, magidim, who would come from town to town, and they would stay in her house, and people would get together there. And she used to let me sit on the steps and watch. She didn't know who they were. She didn't know who. She said those were the two things that gave me that power, right? That idea, that sam tom, that drug of Torah, that can enable a person to stand up to those things. So bottom line, that's what we're trying to do, is that connection. How much you're going to learn already Shavuos night? Okay, how much can you learn already Shavuos night? It's not about the quantity of learning that's going to make you a Superman the next year. It's the connection, it's the Kabbalah, it's the Ava, it's the Simcha. If we're able to do that, then we'll hopefully be able to have this and be able to really understand the Simcha, which gives us more life, more vitality. Toras Chaim, hopefully together with all Am Yisrael.